Good afternoon. This is Manuel Vargas with Keller Williams Realty Landmark 1 and 2 in East Elmhurst, Jackson Heights, and in Bayside, Flushing. And today I wanted to talk to you about property evaluations. What are the different types of evaluations? What is a CMA or comparative market analysis? What is an appraisal done by an appraiser? And what other type of valuations you can get when trying to pinpoint the value of your property. So what do consumers typically do when they're trying to find the value of their home? Whether they want, whether they want to sell it, or maybe they are just curious to know the value, or perhaps because they're thinking about refinancing, or they just want to know how much has the property increased in value. What do they do? So typically, most of the consumers will go to the computer, will Google, property valuation, and you will go to a site like Zillow. And these real estate sites, Zillow, Realtor, and other consumer sites like Trulia, will give you a valuation of your property based on computer data, on data that gathered by artificial intelligence, basically, and would give you an idea of value of your property. Now, as artificial intelligence keeps getting more accurate, more exact, and keeps taking into account more data points, more information about the properties, this information starts being a little bit more accurate. But in general, it is not accurate because what these sites are not doing is that they are not going inside your property to look at the condition, to look at the value, to look at the improvements you have made. So these valuations that you can find in the internet could be very inaccurate and could lead you to make potentially the wrong decision. Another very common, way of people trying to find out the value of their properties is the tax assessor letter. Typically, municipalities will send a letter to tell you how much is your property assessed at by the tax assessor and how much taxes you have to pay based on that, with different formulas and different calculations that they do. Now, these evaluation by the tax assessor is not accurate either. Basically, the municipalities are trying to match the valuations and the taxes they charge to a tax budget that they have, an amount of taxes they have to collect. So the assessors would also do an outside inspection of a property, and they will look at the general size and general condition of the property. But again, they are not going inside your property to really value the property. And sometimes they would come to the wrong conclusion. Sometimes you will get a tax assessor letter that is valuing your property much higher than what it's really worth. Therefore, you end up paying higher taxes. This is why there are certain procedures called tax certiorari to contest that evaluation by the tax assessor. But there are also situations where the tax assessor could be lowballing the value, could be underestimating the value of your property because they don't really take everything into account, including the condition and the layout and other features that your home may have. So the tax assessor letter is not an accurate way of finding out the value of your property. It could be close to the reality, coincidentally, but it's not necessarily accurate. Another way that people use to try and figure out the value of their home is that they would talk to a neighbor that sold the property and it's moving. Hi, Joe, how are you? I see you sold your house. Can you please tell me what you sold it for? Now, you have to bear in mind that sometimes people um, don't want to really share all the information. I'm not trying, let me put this in a very positive light. So, if you ask your neighbor how much they sold the property for, they may be embarrassed to recognize that they sold it for a certain amount, and they may give you the asking price they were selling the house for, not what they really sold the property for. So when you talk to your neighbors, they tell you, I sold my house for 850,000. You tend to take that for good, for exact. It's not always exact, you know. You have to go at the public records, you know, once the property closes and is registered, to find out how much did they really get for the house, because sometimes they could be just embarrassed to share this information with you. Also, what happens is that we are all proud about our properties. It's human nature that you feel very, that home ownership pride, because you live in the house, you raise your family there, you improve the property sometimes with your own hands, and you are very proud about what you have. So when your neighbors tells you, I sold my house for 850, that immediately triggers a reaction in many people, not in everybody, to think, oh, if he sold the house for 850, my house is worth 950. Again, this is not an accurate way of pinpointing the value of your home, right? So I guess there is other ways to estimating the value of your house, and it could be by a gut feeling that you get about the value. Again, not an accurate way of doing it. So the most typical ways to try and pinpoint the value of your house, and the most uh, potentially accurate ways of doing it, if they are done right, are the CMA, or comparative market analysis, and the appraisal of the property. Now, what is the difference between the CMA, or comparative market analysis, and the appraiser? Typically, the CMA is done by a real estate broker that is advising a seller as to the market value. It's trying to advise a seller as to how much the property is worth, and also how much is an ideal asking price in a certain market, depending on supply and demand, right? So comparative market analysis is done by a real estate broker. An appraisal is done by a licensed appraiser, meaning that this is a person that got a license through the state, right, to appraise homes, typically working for mortgage lenders or lenders that finance properties. So here is the first difference. Real estate brokers cannot do appraisals because they are not licensed appraisers. You know, appraisals are done by licensed appraisers, right? So it is a little bit misleading when brokers may say, I'm going to appraise your property. No, we as brokers, we can have a very good idea of the market, but we don't do appraisals. We do comparative market analysis. So let's talk about the CMA. It's called the comparative market analysis because it compares your property to similar property and uses records of sales that are called in the jargon, in the real estate jargon, comps. These are the comps. These are the houses that are comparable to you. Now, in many homeowners, this triggers a little bit of anxiety because their house is unique. You feel that your house is your palace. And the minute somebody tells you your house is being compared to find out the value of the property, sometimes you take this a little personal. Well, don't, because the only way to find out the value of your property is by looking at similar properties. So don't take this personal. Don't take this personally. So when an agent selects the comparable properties, there is his job is determined by his experience. when you are appraising, let's say, one-family houses, obviously you want to look at records of sales of one-family houses. But what are the designs of these properties? If you are selling a Tudor home, you want to look for Tudor homes to compare yours with. So if your agent is not experienced and is comparing different type of houses of very different designs, very different sizes, right? Then this is not going to turn into a very good, accurate comparative market analysis. So you have to look at properties that are similar. If you are appraising or valuing Tudor homes, a Tudor home, you want to look for records of sales of Tudor homes. If you are trying to value a two-family home in a neighborhood that typically has a lot of attached or semi-detached homes, you want to look for similar properties, two-family properties, right? So there is an art and there is an experience factor in selecting these comparable properties, because if you select the wrong comparables, you can come up to the wrong value of your property. So the experience of your real estate agent is important. There is also something to say about the integrity of the comparative market analysis. We realtors, we abide by a code of ethics, and the code of ethics specifically mentions that it's unethical to mislead a home seller or a consumer as to the value of the market value of a property in their intention to secure a listing. In other words, some agents that are desperate to get a listing may tell you what you want to hear just to get your signature. So this is totally unethical. It shouldn't be done, and you shouldn't put yourself into a position to provoke this. In other words, it's better for you to know what your house is really worth and then make your decision based on solid information. You are not looking for a yes man or a yes woman that tells you what you want to hear to maybe overprice your property or maybe underprice your property and then have the story change later on when you don't get the desired results. So there is an integrity component here that your realtor or the broker performing the CMA has to do. You know, we have to give you the right information, right? Now, when we look at records of comparable properties to your property, we try to look at them within a certain period of time. It's usually 6 months, but in a rapidly changing market, if the market is going up or going down very quickly because there are external factors that are influencing the market, like in this pandemic that we went through, then we want to tighten that time frame. We want to look maybe at 3 months, at a 3 months window, because 6 months ago the market was very different. Another feature of the comparative market analysis is that we as brokers not only look at the record of recent sales, properties that actually sold and closed. We also look at properties that are for sale. Why? Because we all know that a market is comprised by supply and demand. So we may have records of sales telling us a part of the story, but if there is a lot more supply now, a lot more inventory, is going to affect the marketability and the value of your property. And this can be, this trend can be forecasted or foreseen by an experienced real estate agent. To give you an example, if Cape Homes in Bayside, Queens are selling around 875 in average condition, right, for the last 3 months, but right now there is no inventory whatsoever because for some reason there are no one family capes in Bayside for sale, you may get higher than 875. And conversely, If two-family townhomes, attached homes in East Elmore, Queens, were selling 3 months ago for 1.1 million, right? And right now there is a surplus of inventory. You may not get 1.1 million, right? Because there is many more properties for sale, right? So one of the advantages that I see uh, between the CMA, the comparative market analysis, and the appraisal is that if you have an experienced broker that can look at the availability, at the existing inventory, you may have another ingredient to determine the trends in the market. This may help you select a, a better asking price. What I'm trying to say, for example, is okay, you know what the properties were selling for 3 months ago, 6 months ago, but if there is no inventory, you may be a little bit more optimistic with your asking price within, uh, reason. If there is a lot more inventory, you may want to be very careful with that asking price, because if you overprice it, then you start competing with a lot of other properties that stay on the market. So the availability component of the CMA is very important. Another ingredient that your broker or we brokers take into account when we do a comparative market analysis is expired homes. Those homes that were put up for sale and did not sell. That's why it's so important that you never draw a conclusion about market value by looking at asking prices, because you never know what actually is going to sell, and you never know what they actually going to sell for. You may think, okay, my neighbor was asking 1.2, therefore I'm going to get 1.250. Wait, but your neighbor never sold the property. It expires. The ones that sold were selling for 1.1. So this is, like I say, it's human nature that we want to do better. Human nature that we want to get more for what we have. That is, I can understand that. But it's also human nature to educate yourself and realize that an asking price doesn't mean a selling price, doesn't mean market value. So those properties that did not sell, 80% of the times they did not sell because the price was too high. It's rare that a property did not sell because there were issues with tenants. That could happen. Or perhaps there was an inexperienced broker that was not doing the right appropriate marketing for that type of house. That could happen. Or perhaps because the seller was not available or not motivated. This happens, but in a limited amount of times. Based on statistics, the most common reason a property doesn't sell is because it was priced incorrectly. So by looking at the properties that expired, your broker can tell you, look, this is what other properties that did not sell were asking. So if you want to sell your property, you don't want to price it like them, right? That is very important. It's also an advantage that I see between a CMA and a licensed appraiser, right? Another factor that the CMA or comparative market analysis takes into account is days on the market. Days on the markets are the number of days that the house is available from the listing date to the contract date. In the area where I work in Queens, we are in a very healthy market, and properties typically go to contract in 30 days or less if everything is done right, if you have a good experienced broker and the property is priced correctly. I realize in other parts of the country this is different, but if you look at properties that are selling and the average time on the market is 30 days, and then you start realizing that the properties start taking longer to sell, this tells you a little bit about the trend in which the market is moving, the direction in which the market is moving. And the other way around, if the average days on the market is 30 days and the properties start to sell in 5, 10 days, in a week, right? Then you realize the market is getting hot. You realize the demand is overtaking supply. The same thing happens with the sell to list ratio. When you are doing a CMA, right, your broker will tell you, look, properties on average are getting 96% of what they are asking. So properties are selling within 4% lower of the asking price. When you look at this amount, the difference between asking price and selling price, when these amounts start increasing, this also tells you what's happening with the market. The properties are being discounted more. That means there is less demand. When you look at these numbers being very close, the asking price to the selling price, it means that demand is very strong and maybe supply is not there. There is the inventory is tight, and therefore buyers are willing to pay closer to the asking price and sometimes above asking price. So the CMA will take into account days on the market and the selling price to the listing price ratio. Okay, so this is something that the appraiser doesn't do. One of the, based on my experience, I've been approached by people that they are being asked by their accountants how much is the property worth, and I can tell you that an accountant would take a CMA, a letter of value done by a broker, would take it into account many times when they are doing a stepped-up basis, when somebody passes away and the value has to be determined as to the date of the person passing away. They will take into account the letter of an experienced broker. You don't have to get an appraiser for that, right? So I have done that for many clients. Typically, we don't charge, brokers don't charge for this service. We do it as a complimentary service. But the most important thing is that you want it to be accurate. Forget about the fact that it's free. If something is free and it's done by somebody that has no experience, you are getting the wrong advice, and this could be a potentially very expensive mistake. So when you are doing a CMA, you want your broker to be experienced and to substantiate the information. Why are they coming at this value? Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the appraisal. The appraisal is done by a licensed appraiser, as we said, and it's typically done to find out the value of an asset where a lender is lending money on, where a bank is doing a mortgage, right? So the bank wants to make sure that the property is worth a certain amount of money, so they have the confidence to lend the money. They don't want to lend the money on a house that is not worth it. So this is most of the times the reason why an appraisal is done. Appraisals are also done for other reasons. Sometimes there are court proceedings where people are fighting for a property, and sometimes the court will send a court-appointed appraiser, and an appraisal will be done so the parties can continue their discussion or litigation or negotiation. So these are also reasons why an appraisal can be done, because there is some kind of court proceeding, maybe a divorce or maybe some kind of a lawsuit or something where people are trying to find out the value of an asset. And so a licensed appraiser will go in, designated by the court, and will perform an appraisal. Now, appraisals have similar information to the CMAs, but not exactly. Appraisers will look at houses, mostly at houses that are sold. They have to look at houses that are recently sold. Depending on the type of mortgage that is being done, there will be different requirements, different criteria. Meaning, if an FHA mortgage is being done, FHA appraisals will have certain requirements. If a mortgage that is backed by Fannie Mae is being done, these appraisals will have what are called Fannie Mae guidelines. So typically, the appraisals are a little bit, I would have to recognize this is a fact, that appraisals are more careful about the criteria that they use to compare properties. To give you an example that I find very often, appraisals try to look for comps that are within 10% in a square footage size. I have to say that not all brokers would be so diligent as to say, okay, are my comps very close in size as to square footage? And the reason being is because sometimes, depending on the information that the broker is getting, brokers are relying on multiple listing information that is sometimes not accurate. So the appraisers, on the other hand, they have a duty to verify this information. They will look at the multiple listing, but then they will tend to verify this information with municipal sources, or during the appraisal inspection, they will measure the property to find out the square footage, for example. So one of the differences where you could see maybe a little bit more value in an appraisal is that the appraisers will verify the information. They will use information, they will use comparables that are closer in their features, right? And then when they find comparables that differ in certain features, they do what is called adjustments. So appraisers are more experienced in performing these adjustments. And the way the adjustments work is that when they typically have three comparable cells, right, similar to the subject property, when a comparable cell has a feature that is superior to that feature of the subject, the appraiser will deduct something from the value that that comparable cell sold at. Meaning, if the subject property doesn't have a garage and the comparable property has a garage and sold for 220, for example, a condominium that had a garage space and sold for 220, the appraisal would deduct that value of that garage, right, from the value of the comp to try and determine the value of the subject. Conversely, if it is the subject who has the superior feature, right, where the subject has a garage and the comparable cell does not have a garage, the adjustment will be done on the comparable and it will be an increase in value, meaning the subject is worth more money, so the value of that comparable would be more had it the superior feature that the subject has. So appraisers are very savvy and are trained and educated in doing these adjustments. Real estate agents that are experienced and educated can attempt to do these adjustments, but it has to say that it requires a lot of experience. For example, if we are talking about an adjustment for a garage, right? How do you determine the value of this garage? Well, there is a process, right, to determine this value, but looking at sets of comparables, right? Appraisers are trained to do this. So one of the most important differences that I see between the appraiser doing his evaluation and the broker doing his CMA is that the appraiser will do this adjustment in a more systematic, experienced way, right? Another feature that the appraisals have is that they are called a snapshot in time. They would look at value, they have stringent requirements to use comparables within a certain time of in the market. So they cannot use a comparable sale of 8 months ago, for example, if there are recent sales in the market. So they also have requirements for that. Typically, the most they can go out is 6 months. And that is not to say that they will use, they would prefer comparables that are 6 months older to comparables that are 3 months older. If there is an abundance of recent data, they would rather use the recent data. Also, sometimes when there is a very limited amount of data in a certain market, for example, a luxury enclave in a certain neighborhood where you don't have a lot of properties, where not a lot of properties sell every year. Give you an example. For example, the landmark district of Jackson Heights, or Forest Hill Gardens, or Bayside Gables. These neighborhoods are very specific. There is not a lot of sales every year. So appraisers would be allowed to go over 6 months more to look at the data. And they can do what is called a time adjustment. They can say, okay, this property in the landmark district of Jackson Heights sold 10 months ago. I'm going to use this comparable. Now, how is the market now compared to that? The market is higher, the market is lower. They would do an adjustment based on that. The one thing that I think the appraisals are missing is the information on available property. The appraisers would look at the general health of the market, but they don't look in detail at available properties. Real estate brokers, we have to look at this because we know that the potential buyers are going to ask us, okay, very beautiful property that you listed, but what about the one around the corner? Why is it asking less money? Why is it asking more money, right? This is not the job of the appraisers. The job is not to market property or to sell property. Their job is to prove the value to the bank. So they don't place a lot of emphasis on properties that are available for sale and properties that expire. And I think this is an asset that we brokers can contribute, this information about properties that are available, which will give you an idea of how strong is the demand, how limited the supply could be, and properties that did not sell, expired properties. These are not contemplated typically on an appraisal. The other thing that appraisals would take into account is that they look at the general condition of the property. They are not a home inspection by any means, but they would want to see that a property is in livable condition, is habitable. They would also look at very obvious code violations. So if a handrail is missing, if there is an illegal apartment, if there is a utility that is disconnected, right? Appraisals would have to reflect this because they are bound by their code of conduct or their license to red flag these issues. The real estate brokers, they can take this into account, but we can be a little bit more practical about it, meaning we can tell you, okay, most likely this is a feature that is gonna be an obstacle for the sale. For example, there is an illegal apartment, and when the appraisal comes in, this is gonna be a red flag. So we can tell you to address these issues before you put the property on the market. The appraisals, they have to mention this, and if the property, if the deal is not going to go through because of this, it's already a little too late. So an experienced broker can tell you in general what are the general code of compliance items that your house may be missing. There is another type of property evaluation that people that you hear about is what is called BPOs, or broker price opinions. These are related mostly to evaluations done by real estate brokers uh, for mortgage lenders that are, you know, trying to make a quicker decision. So they typically do not involve an interior inspection. They are typically a drive-by and are typically done for these lenders to make a decision about their mortgage, meaning maybe they are selling the mortgage to another lender, or perhaps they are in a short sale situation where the value of the property does not cover of everything that is owed on the mortgage. So before spending the money on an appraisal, they will send a broker and say, look, can you give me an idea of the market value? Can you do this BPO for this property and tell me where the value is? So these are very general ideas of value. These BPOs are not as accurate as appraisals or as CMAs, and are typically done by lenders to try and save money. Honestly, they would pay 50, 60, $75 for a broker to go do drive-bys and take exterior photos and come up with the value based on the general criteria um, and public information available. Um, so basically, these are the ways that the value can be determined in real estate. So, before determining the value, people try to look for the value in the computer, in the internet, and this could be very inaccurate because nobody's looking at the interior condition of the property, nobody's looking at the layout of the property, nobody's looking at the intangibles. You may look in Trulia for the value of your condo. And if your building has 20 floors, maybe after the 10th floor, there is a view. And this will determine a difference in price because, we all know that views are desirable and people will pay more money for an apartment that has a beautiful view instead of an apartment that is looking straight into the brick wall of the neighboring building. So these are the intangibles that artificial intelligence doesn't take into account yet. This may change, with technology, artificial intelligence, computer, and the internet may start getting more accurate about values, but computer valuations are still not there. They are getting closer to the reality. They are not there. And again, to summarize, tax assessor letters are also not an accurate idea of the value. They could be higher, they could be lower, right? Guesstimates and what your neighbor says he sold the property for is not an accurate idea of the value of your property because every property is unique. Asking prices are not an accurate idea of the market value because an asking price is not necessarily the final closing price, right? And then you have CMAs, appraisals, and BPOs. CMS done by a broker, hopefully a broker with experience that will look at similar properties, that will look at available properties, that will look at expired properties, and will give you the right advice. And an appraisal done by a licensed appraiser, typically to determine the value of an asset for a lender. So I hope this has been informative. And remember, if you want to find out the value of your property in New York, call me. I have 26 years of experience. Uh, I have done appraisals for homeowners that were bank appraisals and that they argue about the value would be only to tell me, Manny, you were right. Okay, so I have also done appraisals and sold the properties of bank attorneys. I have also done appraisals for other real estate brokers that were selling the property and they were out of state. And you would laugh about how interesting it is to argue about the value with another broker when they are the owners. Because when brokers are selling the properties, they are just like any other client. They feel very proud about their improvements and their properties. So we have the experience. We would tell you what kind of adjustments you can make to your value. We will tell you about the trend in the market. We will tell you about those intangibles. We will tell you how to maximize the value of your property. This is very important. This is something that appraisals are not going to necessarily tell you. They just tell you what the value is today. We can tell you how to stage a property, how to do minimal changes that don't cost a lot of money to show your property in the best possible light. We will tell you also about what is the best timing for you to sell. So if you need to evaluate your property, by all means, it's free, but the most important thing in my case, I'm using my experience of 26 years and my experience of my education of having a Bachelor of Science in Real Estate. And I can advise you as to the market value within a very high degree of confidence. Thank you for listening. Don't hesitate to call me 917-559-2002 or email me at Manuel, Manuel, at topqueensagent.com. Thank you.